Hello, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for convening this panel. So I think the place to start is to talk about how much has changed since the beginning of 2025. We saw sweeping raids on scam compounds in both Myanmar and Cambodia. Thousands of workers were released. We saw the fall of Chen Zhi, the head of the Prince Group, and this notorious man was extradited to China. $15 billion of his cryptocurrency, among other assets, were seized. By my count, the United States government has sanctioned over 200 entities affiliated with the scam compound economy in Myanmar and Cambodia. Starlink even shut down some terminals that were providing internet access to scam compounds in Myanmar. So is this a moment to celebrate the end of impunity, a turning point in the fight against this entrenched industrial scale model? How much has really changed? What happened to all those people who poured out onto the streets from the scam compounds? What happened to the criminal networks who are running these enterprises? How are they adapting? So our panelists today have a lot to say about this, and we'll start with Montse from Amnesty International, who has just come out with a hard-hitting 150-page report about the situation in Cambodia.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Montse Ferrer, and I am Regional Director at Amnesty International. I cover Southeast Asia, East Asia, and the Pacific. And for those of you who haven't heard of Amnesty International, we're an organization that documents human rights violations across the world. I have some bad news. I'm here to talk about why I think we're losing the fight against the scam industry. And I'm going to do it from a human rights lens, because I'm convinced that without that lens, this industry never ends. But I'm going to focus on Cambodia as an example. In June of last year, the Cambodian government started the largest crackdown since the beginning of the crisis. Since then, it claims to have shut down 200 scamming compounds. High-profile arrests have taken place. International praise followed. But this week, my team at Amnesty International publishes a report assessing this crackdown. And it's called Falling Through the Cracks. I'm going to tell you our key findings. Finding number 1, human rights abuse continued during this last crackdown. We've now spoken to more than 150 survivors and have records of more than 400 others. And this is what we documented: torture, child labor, forced labor, human trafficking, slavery. And also, most recently, we documented sexual abuse, rape. I'm going to give you a story. A woman is trafficked into Cambodia. She is then forced to perform online as an AI model. She is raped repeatedly by the compound manager. She becomes pregnant. She's told to terminate that pregnancy without medical support. Her friend next door, same compound, same fate, but she bleeds to death. The police never investigate. I'm telling you this story not to shock you, although it is certainly shocking, but because these are the people that the crackdown was meant to protect. Finding number 2, the crackdown causes a humanitarian crisis. In December and January, thousands of people escaped and/or were released from scamming compounds across the country. Thousands found themselves stranded. Most had no passports because they had been confiscated. The majority had no money, no medical support, no nothing. As of today, more than 10,000 people continue to be stranded in the streets of Phnom Penh in Cambodia. We interviewed a number of them, 73 to be precise, and their stories were all very similar. None of them had received any support from the government. None of them had been identified as a human trafficking victim. And by the way, Cambodia has extensive regulations on how to do precisely that. Their interactions with the police were very similar. The police threatened them, the police arrested them, or the police simply ignored them. And all along during this 1-year crackdown, there is one shelter in the country, only 100 capacity. Without proper human trafficking victim identification and support, these individuals will be re-trafficked, and in fact, we know they have. Many of them have already moved, unfortunately, to other locations out of sheer desperation. And finding 3, we cannot ignore the political and economic elites. Raids, arrests, prosecutions, they matter, and they've happened to an extent. But the most entrenched, those who are more to lose with this crackdown, have been untouched. And I'll give you an example. Amnesty International has identified 88 scamming compounds across Cambodia. What's a scamming compound? It's a scamming compound where there's scamming, but where there's direct link to human rights abuse. 67% of those, 67% are linked to casinos. Earlier this year, in January, 16 of those had their licenses reauthorized in the middle of a crackdown. That isn't a crackdown. So, unless we take this seriously and we do this holistically, this is not going to end. Number 1, victims are not collateral. They are individuals with rights. They must be properly supported or they will be re-trafficked. Number 2, political and economic elites. They cannot be ignored. And number 3, and I'll end with the GASA summit. Yesterday, many of you talked about public-private partnerships. That's great, it's important. But they need to include and involve the NGOs that are at the front line of this fight, the anti-trafficking organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Toby, you have a very different point of view on this. You're looking at this problem from a very different perspective. Can you tell us more about what you're seeing, what is changing, what is not changing?
Yeah, thanks, and good morning, everyone. I think that was a really good introduction to set the scene and set the tone, and I really appreciate that. And I think what surprised all of us with this problem, that the scammers, which are often shown in this hoodie in the back of a room in front of a keyboard, are actually victims themselves and under horrific circumstances and conditions. And last year, for those who were fortunate enough to go to the Singapore Asia GASA Summit, we heard from the Royal Thai Police and the Thai General, and this was organised from the Oceania chapter, and Meta included on that. Thanks very much for organising the Royal Thai Police contingent. And we heard a similar plea, and it was all through a translator, but you could hear a pin drop in the room. And the Thai General called for support for global action. A part of the problem, and we know it's a multifaceted problem, but it's a low-risk, high-reward crime where we have law enforcement saying, especially from Western law enforcement, saying we can't arrest our way out of this problem. Similarly, from industry, we can't compliance our way out of this problem. It does take that toolbox approach. And so the General called for action. And what's really been pleasing is coming back yesterday, and it just changed me to be a little bit more positive about this problem, where we can see action happening. We know the Chinese authorities have been taking action, but more importantly, we've now seen the US authorities taking action. Now, why is that important? So before I worked for private industry, I worked for domestic and international law enforcement and intelligence, and what I focused on and working with our American and global partners was follow the money strategies. And that led us to all the predicate offences, whether it be terrorism, selling weapons, or drug trafficking. And what the Americans do best is those follow the money strategies, where they taught the world that, and they refer to that also as the kingpins, because if they infiltrate into the money laundering networks, they can identify and arrest and prosecute the kingpins and seize their ill-gotten gains and take out their business model. So yesterday, hearing from the judge, I'm very positive about that, and that's something that I've been calling for a while. Now, domestically, we've been trying to do that. Our own Australian Federal Police, through Operation Fireside, has been working with the Thai authorities. Indeed, we found some Australians in some of the, there were sort of smaller type compounds or boiler rooms, as they call them, in Bangkok, and disrupted them with investment scams. And similarly, we were able to take that back to the domestic money laundering networks. And that money is their business model. So if we can take that away, we can really have that most significant impact. Because unfortunately for industry, whilst we need to do our part, and every sector in the digital economy needs to do their part, it's a small fraction of all transactions. And then we're also in that difficult thing of trying to unpick the social engineering and sort of fighting it from the wrong end, albeit important end. So we really got to take this fight as close to the source as possible, and that's where law enforcement needs our help, and governments really need to take scams as a priority. And what we saw yesterday is a national security threat, which what it is. So again, yesterday, and I think some of the call-outs from the new FATF president, like music to my ears, I think that's going to be a game changer as well, and then getting this up to being a priority for the G20 as well.
Thank you, Toby. So talking about this as a problem that needs to be attacked from many different perspectives with many different tools, let's go to Nathaniel at Meta. Your products are abused as part of the workflow of many scam centers. What are you seeing? What has changed? What has stayed the same?
Thank you, and thanks everyone for being here and giving us some time to talk about this. When I think about the criminal scam syndicates that drive this, the sort of most malicious, most adversarial, highest volume threat actors in this space, and sort of grounding it, I think, in a lot of the context you offered, Montse, the word that I think is most important to think about for the criminal scam syndicates is the word impunity. They operate with impunity, and they have figured out a way to build an entire criminal enterprise on that reality. And yes, we are seeing crackdown in Cambodia. Yes, we have seen increased pressure on these actors. We also, because a lot of our work is tracking and countering these actors, we see the volumes that they are delivering, we see the bad behavior they're engaged in, and I'm here to tell you, they are not stopping. We can still see the violating behavior, the harm coming out of these criminal centers. And so the impunity is what they use to enable this, right? Because they can vertically integrate their operations, because they can build these operations in public and not worry about hiding their tracks, because at the end of the day, they don't get arrested. They're able to operate at volume and at speed and drive harm in an incredible way, and I think it's really critical. They're driving harm on both ends of this, the scam victims and also the human trafficking victims who are often driving this. When we think about what we've seen change, I think it is important to say there is definitely increasing pressure on the scam compounds, and we are seeing these actors adapt. We are seeing diffusion of their techniques, and what I mean by that is two things. First, we're seeing criminal scam actors look more at setting up compounds in other parts of the world, moving away from the obvious hotspots in Southeast Asia where there's been so much focus. We see exploration in Africa, in Middle East, in Latin America, quite frankly, in Europe, in the developed world. They're looking for places where they can leverage this impunity. We also see them testing more diffuse models, right? Rather than all being in one compound, efforts to try to create networks of scamming operations in cities where they might be able to hide better within the broader behavior. Now, the challenge with this information is you can interpret it in one of two ways. One is they're facing serious pressure and adapting their behavior. Two is they have a business model, a criminal model, that they think is working and they want to expand it. And it's very hard to tell which of those is the truth right now. When we think about how to counter these actors, we think about three things, or four things. First, building defenses on our platform to make their abuse of our platforms as difficult as possible. And I'm not going to go through all four of these because I want us to have more time to talk. I saw you were worried there for a minute. Second is how we can build resources and support for the victims on both ends of this attack chain. Third is how we can disrupt these scammers directly with our own activity. And then fourth, to the point of the all tools discussion, is how we can support and help to change the impunity that is the hack they use to cause so much of this harm. And I will just say, one of the things we have seen, we've been working now with law enforcement for some time. Last month, we were part of and helped sort of coordinate the largest focused disruption effort against these scammers so far. Brought together law enforcement from around the world in Washington, D.C. We were there, and a bunch of other companies were there, sharing intelligence to take action. We removed almost 1.5 million accounts as a result of that one-week sprint. Law enforcement conducted 63 arrests. Coinbase seized $3 million in crypto. Microsoft removed a bunch of accounts, and I think you noted this, Starlink shut down a number of units that were being used by these actors to get satellite access. We also were able to identify a number of potential new scam compounds and share that information with law enforcement. That is encouraging, and one of the reasons it's encouraging is because of the trend. The last one of these we were in, we removed 50,000 accounts as a result of this. Because more people were around the table and more organizations, we were able to scale up the impact. Now, disruption like this by itself doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve the impunity problem, but it does put more pressure on them. And as we're thinking about where to go, as we put all these pieces together, I do think the words from FATF were really important. I think the pressure we all put on the states that shelter them is really critical. And I think there's an interesting model to think about here. You mentioned the kingpin model. You mentioned the elites. When I think about cybersecurity and cybercrime, there has been a concerted effort for a number of years, I was involved in it some years ago, to put direct consequences and pressure on the elites that benefit from this. To make it so they don't get to travel out of the country they hide in. To make it so they don't get to access their money. All of these pressures have consequences and change their behavior. And building on that to tackle the impunity. These are very powerful actors, but their model is also extremely fragile. Because all of their eggs are in this one basket, this basket of impunity. If we can change that, the entire playing field changes. So that's how I think about what we need to do. That is maybe a blend of a pessimistic analysis and a slightly optimistic analysis, which I sort of can't help doing sometimes. There's a lot more work to do. We have a lot of work to do. And everyone up on this stage and everyone here in this room does.
Thank you. So we have seen some of these pressures brought to bear over the last year in terms of sanctions, these periodic waves of quote-unquote raids that have happened. Mina, you have a very good, hard one on-the-ground perspective of what the impacts of some of these have been. Can you talk to us more about what you're seeing in Cambodia and how the criminal industry there is adapting?
Thank you so much, everyone. My name is Mina. I'm the founder and director of a humanity research consultancy. We are a research organization that focuses a lot on addressing human trafficking and modern slavery. Our engagement with Scam Compound takes back to 2022, where we actually supported quite a lot of survivors of human trafficking, and also because our language ability, we are able to actually see directly what the Chinese criminal syndicate is communicating. I'm going to share, to answer the question, through maybe 3 little stories. The first one is through a survivor from East Africa. He was unfortunately trafficked to both Myanmar and Laos. A lot of situations, what we heard is people are being moved between borders multiple times. He went back to his home country back in 2024. Unfortunately, he has been telling me how much not just there's new compounds, new operations coming up by the Chinese syndicates, and these are the same kind of management models, but also some of his friends start joining the online remote work operations that's set out by the same syndicate. So I'm just noticing here, like not just the physical work, but actually we are seeing a phenomenon of those scam operations being a remote job as well. The second case, a survivor also recently left Cambodia. I mean, as Montse mentioned, there's a humanitarian crisis. A majority of them really still stranded in Cambodia, struggling to go back. But in his case, he's lucky to get sponsorship. He went back to his home country in East Africa as well. But unfortunately, he's still struggling so much to find jobs, to find opportunities. And he's one of the very vulnerable person that, in my view, that he might fall back again to some of the criminal syndicate operations. He has a newborn baby. And he's struggling to find meals, struggling to find shelters, and this is what we see, that if we see scam operations, it's really important to think of the people behind, because it's not a faceless operation. The third situation, I'm just a bit complicating things even more. I'm still on a daily basis receiving individuals reaching out, asking for help. Recently, there's an individual from East Africa. They say they are stranded in Myanmar. And by the way, since the crackdown of the KK compound, there's at least 27 new compounds that have been identified. Just think about that. Criminals are not just disappearing, but actually they are relocating and adopting. Anyway, for this individual, he very directly said, actually, he carries criminal records of conducting online scam in his past. But also, he's now trapped. He's a victim of a human trafficking and modern slavery. He's not able to leave. His communication is always being very broken. Like some days he appears, reaching out. Some days he says he's too afraid to actually say anything. What I'm saying is that we need to drop the ideas of looking at people behind the scam as a binary view of either criminal or victims of human trafficking. There's a lot in between. Somebody who has a criminal record might become victims of human trafficking, or in different kind of ways, being forced to engage in the activity. And only when we recognize these people and thinking about their path, thinking about how to support them, that we can really try to address this issue. Back to Cambodia a bit. As Nathaniel also mentioned briefly, that it's about the political impunity. Nowadays, we are seeing crackdowns, but how many officials, Cambodian officials, are we seeing that actually taking responsibilities, that actually being punished by sheltering those scam compounds over the years? Very limited. And because of that, because of the same system still in place, that's what we are seeing the predictions, that the scam operation is not going anywhere. They will come back, they will continue, they will adopt. Finally, I want to give some little practical solutions. As we mentioned, the people behind, especially the survivors of human trafficking, many of them are so desperate, they're really struggling to even find the next meal and the next opportunity. But many of them are really, really highly skilled. They might have a computer science background, they might have a master, some of them even have a PhD. How to think about all these group of people? If they are just being put there idled, is extremely dangerous. They are going to be reabsorbed back to the syndicates. So I have a small recommendation that the tech companies, instead of building your team on combating online scam, through the so-called expert, why not trying to turn to these experts who actually really know what's going on from inside? There's a huge need of jobs, and they are really, really good at it. Many of them, they speak and write in such a way, I'm so amazed. So yeah, just a brief conversations for now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So I think there is an image coalescing in the public mind around what a scam compound is, that it's a center in Southeast Asia driven by Chinese criminality. But I wonder, as we're having a broader public consciousness of this phenomenon, is that a model of the past? And I think some of you have started to talk about that a little bit. And certainly the push factors of an educated workforce that has very little opportunity, the potential for massive criminal gains without consequence. How are you seeing this model evolve geographically, strategically, technologically, in terms of the kinds of scams that are being done, human trafficking patterns, the kinds of technology that's being abused?
I'll start just briefly. So I think all the good work we're doing in the account-to-account space for payments and banking is making it harder for that business model. So we're seeing a displacement. We're seeing a displacement especially to cards, where it's gone from essentially using cards for high volume, low value type scams in the e-commerce space, or social engineering from online marketplaces. So we're having to respond to that in the cards area. And I sort of wonder, well, why is that the case? Is it because of all the work we're doing from the telecommunications industry, where it's harder to now contact and communicate? I question, is AI having an impact, and is that assisting the compounds able to sort of outsource or silo out activity, and then from AI is it making it easier to set up those fake merchant websites and proceed through that type of criminality. We saw a significant influx of the cells associated with those organised crime networks coming to Australia and setting up SIM farms. I know that's been a theme generated globally. The impact that had to our citizens was significant. So each of those SIM farms could hold 300 SIM cards, but yet each SIM card could send an SMS message every 2 seconds. So our whole community was inundated with that phishing campaign. And we're seeing that with our card fraud data starting to increase. And so, for example, 3% of all our total card spend is Australian cards overseas, but yet it's now 50% of all our card fraud.
Yeah, maybe I will add a little bit more. Just what we are seeing is, by the way, first of all, scam compound is a location for multiple different scam companies to come together. So when we crack down a scam compound, it's like, okay, if today we are not having a convention in this building, they can easily change another building. It's just a physical location. And also it's a congregation of a varieties of different companies. Some might be doing romance investment. Some might be doing, for example, the task scam or like investment, other kind of scams. So it's very easy for these individuals to take the know-how and actually kind of regroup it and to change your location. So that's exactly what we are seeing. And that's the reason why, for example, some of the survivors or victims, that they're being moved from, for example, Cambodia to Myanmar and vice versa. To answer the question a little bit more, like besides the kind of a geographic expansion and besides the one I just mentioned, for example, from physical work to the kind of remote job style, we are also seeing more kind of nationalities being dragged into this. So not just, for example, like victims of human trafficking, but also online we can see lots of so-called AI models. It's not clear that those individuals either willingly join the operation or actually being forced to. But there's a variety for Europeans. Actually, we are seeing them become AI models in the operation. And of course, we are also seeing some of the massive scale, like for example in Cambodia, you can identify some compounds like 10,000 people, 5,000 people. They might adopt into a smaller scale, so back to, for example, 200 people in a villa or like 100 people in a building. So that could be multiple different kind of scales. But it's important to know also sometimes the criminals are able to monitor their team using the surveillance abilities to remotely control some of their money laundering or scam operation team. Recently, there are some cases, for example, in India, you can find that actually they were controlled by the operators behind, like in Hong Kong. So it's getting very much, there's a term like the phygital, so the physical and digital kind of a combination, and we are seeing that in the scam operation.
Okay, so we have a very resilient adversary that is diversifying its geographical risk, evolving its business model. Before we end here, I wanted to just take a moment to talk about something that's come up a lot at this conference, which is information sharing. And I think there's a couple of aspects of information sharing that are very relevant to scam compounds. Number one, I would love to hear from Montse and Mina about these thousands of workers who are pouring out onto the streets. They have a lot of intelligence. This is low-hanging fruit. Who is there to collect it? And what happens to that information? How is it shared? How is it acted on?
Sure. So maybe before we could talk about information sharing, we need to talk about, are these people even capable of sharing information? And I think that's really, really important. It goes back to what I said earlier. I mean, I wouldn't say it's an extreme case. I gave an example. People leave these compounds, people we speak to, yeah, extremely traumatized. Unless there's support, those people cannot be information sharers. So that's number one. And it's really, really important. I can't stress that enough. Second, though, yes, there is. I would say my experience, I've interviewed many of the individuals. I don't think that a lot of individuals know what's going on across the scam they're involved in. In fact, what we've seen is that mostly you have an individual or a team that's involved in one piece of the scam. It could be the first contact with an individual, so other team has already identified the numbers. Say there was one that we were looking, they were American individuals, they were all older men, mostly single. That identification of those numbers had already happened. The team that we spoke to, and they were still in the compound, they were just doing that first contact. As soon as that individual that they were targeting was interested, then it went to a different team, who then went to a different platform. So they transferred from WhatsApp to Telegram or vice versa. So I do think that a lot of people that come out of these compounds have information, but they don't have information. My experience, yeah, you might find a team leader, they don't have information about the entire scam. They usually have information about one, which means that you need to speak to a lot of people, and you need to provide that support, not for one individual who's going to give you the storyline of everything, but actually the whole group of people who are coming out and who need support before they can share information.
Maybe I'll briefly share two cases. One case is a survivor. After he came out, he was able to identify his trafficker, and through the sharing with international police and Interpol, actually in the end, the trafficker was arrested in Dubai. So this is one example, because when we try to stop this by taking down the AIDS, it will never be enough. But when we try to address the people behind, we have a little bit more chance. Another case, maybe I will give another example. My good friend and also colleague, Abdul Salam. Salam, he's one of the survivors coming out from scam compounds back in 2022. And as Montse mentioned, it's important to make sure they are supported. And in his case, after all the support, he was able to actually, being an international speaker, speak about scam operations. He was actually spoken in UN conferences in New York, in Vienna. He was able to raise awareness to many people. He was able to share information to so many organizations that actually benefit from his insights, both on the humanitarian side and both on the more kind of intelligence element. So I would say very much survivors has lots to offer, and it's a missing opportunity if we forget to engage them suitably. Thank you.
Okay, quickly on information sharing. Another aspect of information sharing. Within one company, Nathaniel, why do I keep talking to scammers who have been kicked off of Instagram and Facebook but continue to be able to use WhatsApp to target their victims? First quick question. Second question for both of you. We've heard a lot about the success of this Disruption Week, a quick exercise hosted by the United States where industry and government partners came together and had huge impact on this industry. Why doesn't that happen every day? Why doesn't that kind of collaboration happen every day? How would the world look different if that were not a voluntary one-off exercise, but a legally required thing that happened 365 days a year, just as scammers are operating 365 days a year?
Well, the first thing I would say is it does happen quite more often than just once a month or once every 7 months. We've had some coverage of various times that we've shared intelligence with law enforcement that has led to arrests with the UK, in Nigeria, in Southeast Asia, and other places around the world. But the benefit of a disruption week is a bunch of work goes into amongst all the partners asking what intelligence can we fuse, to your question, that is going to be most effective and lead to the most impact. So that week that you see is the result of actually weeks or months of lead up, figuring out across the community how can we have the most short-term impact. So that's why it doesn't happen, it happens every day, but you see these exclamation marks when you're able to bring together the community to have that rapid, fast response. To your first question, I would need to see the specific examples. We constantly see threat actors hop platforms within our community across to other platforms and back, and we do aggressive cross-platform enforcement, but we see them cycle identifiers, cycle factors that are able to find them to hide exactly in the way you're describing. And it's worth noting, you were talking about, and you mentioned earlier, the importance of working with the victims in the communities. I would just say, when you think about information sharing, what's most important is that each player who comes to the table has a different perspective and different types of intelligence. We have gotten incredible value from partnerships with civil society, and it's been really critical. We do, for example, as we're detecting and blocking exactly those kinds of trafficking ads that are trying to traffic people into these scam centers, we block the ones that we can prove are trafficking. But obviously scammers are very good at hiding the fact that this is a trafficking ad. So we worked with the International Justice Mission and other organizations to build these very aggressive interstitials, these barriers, even when we're not sure or confident that something is a trafficking ad, to give that context. We can only do that because of the intelligence that that victims and that these communities bring.
Okay, lightning round here, just to close. We're out of time. What is one thing you're doing differently to address this changing ground reality, and one thing you would like someone else to do to help you?
Well, I don't know what we're doing differently, but what I would like it to do, at least for our country, is follow the UK lead with making scams a threat to national security. And to your earlier question, I think that would see the appropriate amount of law enforcement resources contributed to that, but also international collaboration. That's real. So we speak about information sharing, we spoke about private to private. Well, what information do we want to share to fix what problem? It needs to be triaged. When you talk about public-private, well, it's essentially assisting law enforcement in their operations in a very complex geopolitical environment, and that involves coordination. So we really need to see that on the global scale.
Okay.
We're focusing more and more on early warnings that we can give to people, even when we're not confident something's a scam. Because we often lack visibility into what happens off of our platforms. We can't wait until perfect confidence. And so we're rolling out more and more defenses that give early warnings when you're contacted by someone who's not in your address book, or when someone friends you from overseas. And we've seen that those help people get out of the scam funnel early. In terms of things that we would like to see different, I started at the beginning. I think impunity is such a huge part of this problem because of the scale at which these actors operate. It is really incredible to see the focus of FATF, to see governments stepping up. We disrupt these actors. Last year, we removed 11 million accounts linked just to these actors in Southeast Asia. It won't surprise you how quick they are to come back. Not just when we disrupt their accounts, but even when we block their devices. And so government effort, geopolitical effort, to change the economic calculus between the states that host these actors is most critical here. We're doing everything we can to support that. But that is a broader effort that we can't do on our own.
Yeah, I would say maybe two things. The first one is because we are a research organization, so we do document and research and then sharing information. One thing we found quite powerful and successful is a report done by Jake Sims, was successfully being able to name a list of targets that should be sanctioned. And that report came almost exactly a year ago. It has received lots of great impact. Actually, we see sanctions, and we actually see the report being cited numerous times in major places. We think this model is really important, and we have to, again, create accountability to those people who are really on the top and enabling everything. So yeah, this is a plan to continue putting out those more evidence out there. The second thing is I think it's important to broaden our conversation, not just in those limited countries. As I mentioned, some of the people are trafficked through, for example, Malaysia or Thailand. They are transit countries. Some of the Europeans, we are seeing them being dragged into scam compounds. Every one of us has a role to play. It's not just about Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos. There's a role for everybody to play. So I would say the 2 points. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll end two things. One, what would I like to see different with people in this room and beyond? It's the holistic approach. If you think of this as a supply chain, you ignore one of the pieces of the supply chain, the rest of it won't be fixed. And two, what are we doing different? We are doing that as well, actually, and we're thinking about this much more regionally. Some people talk about the approach to this as a whack-a-mole, where you're whacking one and then it comes out. That's exactly what this is. And so our approach as well is to think not only about what's happening in Cambodia, but what's happening across the region and around the world. And I invite you all to think about it that way as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.